All right. Things like Zornhau, the Wrath Guard, these really leaned positions where you actually have to start with your left foot forward and somehow step forward with your right foot. Seems like a really long step. How do you do that fast? We're going to talk about how in just a minute. Hello, this is Jeff Tsai, Forte Sword Play. So today we're going to start by kind of building on some of the footwork that we've been talking about in the German Longsword 101 series. We talked about sort of basic footwork where you can kind of step alternating or step doubling. Today I want to focus specifically on footwork where we actually have to be switching sides. So where you might actually start with, say, your left side, left foot forward, and you need to end up with your right foot, right side forward, right? How do we actually motivate that? How do we do that in a way that is sort of as efficient as possible? So when you kind of start in this position, and a lot of the sources, a lot of the techniques have you start left foot forward, and they tell you to take a step with so that your right foot ends up forward. So a very natural thing, the sort of most obvious intuitive thing is to literally just do this. Right? So the vast majority of interpretations out there for those kind of techniques just automatically assume this, which is fine, but is it? And part of, over the years, something that I've kind of noticed as a real sort of tactical problem is, on top of that, you'll see things in the sources where it's not just this kind of a position, but it's actually much more lean back, really committed, in particular weight on the back leg, right? So really there's not much weight here. It's all on this rear leg. It's all loaded here. So one of the big questions, like, from this Zornhau, Wrath Guard position, if I am expected to throw a Wrath Cut and I'm going to take a step with that right foot forward, this is a huge tempo. It's a huge tempo. I cover a lot of distance. That's one of the advantages. Like, it's a lot of power, it's a lot of distance, but opponent's going to see that coming a mile away. So is that the full story, right? Is it just an offensive, aggressive thing? And to answer that question, we're now going to actually pivot the problem to talking not about footwork, but actually about how do we turn, how do we pivot in a way where I'm going to start with my left side, and then I'm going to end up with my right side forward, and doing that as efficiently as possible. Okay, so if we're going to think about how quickly we can and efficiently we can pivot, we're going to motivate this not by looking at the sources, but actually by thinking just pure physics. Think of this as a physics problem, right? So I'm going to take this rod. And this is actually a very common physics problem that people learn in school these days. There's the question of what is the moment of inertia? The thing that sort of determines how fast things can move and accelerate when they rotate at different points. So if I'm rotating for this rod around this point here, the end, there's a certain sort of mathematical value for that. And you can see from the math, you can see that actually that value is going to be slower, the slowest actually, compared to if we want to do this where this rotates the fastest, and we're switching, from here to here forward. This is the fastest, doing it through the center, right? Anywhere where I can actually rotate in the center is going to be the fastest. This is going to be the slowest, right? So all that being said, what does that have to do with the body, right? So if we take this and then we actually kind of turn this into a big sheet, right? You can think of the body now as basically like a giant door, right? So now the equivalent of this is this, right? And in fact, it is the thing that people assume automatically when they're told, start with the left foot and step with your right foot forward. So what is the equivalent of this? Is there a faster, more efficient way to step to facilitate a pivot? And the answer is this. So like if we were allowed to hop, you could do this, right? So that is the equivalent of this. Now, if you go back to the fundamentals that we were looking at for footwork, notice that we're really doing something where we're actually kind of going from footfall to footfall. We're not really hopping. So not that we can't look at hopping, but as sort of being consistent with that sort of style of movement, that sort of like dance-like walking, springing movement, makes more sense to actually do this. So this is something which over the years we kind of identified and have played with for a long time. And these things that don't have names in the sort of traditional system, we have to invent things for. So we call this the box step, okay? Right? And so one of the things I want people to notice actually is you'll see that, first of all, I am rotating for the most part around my center, right? Like the center axis here does not really go forward or backward too much. It's really just the shoulders. Rotate forward, rotate back. If we're looking at my right shoulder, rotate forward, rotate back. So that's this pattern. And there's a mirror pattern to that where instead of the right foot coming forward and then right foot going back, there's also left foot forward, left foot back, left foot forward, left foot back. Left foot forward, left foot back, left foot forward, left foot back. Jumping ahead a little bit, but like, what does that have to do with sword stuff? An example could be, since this is built for kind of coming forward and then coming back, there's a very natural attack-defend element to this, right? So I could, for instance, do Zorn, Ochs parry, Zorn, Ochs parry, Zorn, Ochs parry, and I can totally do that sideways as well. I can go Zorn, Ochs parry, Zorn, Ochs parry, Zorn, Ochs parry, Zorn, Ochs parry, right? Or I can go the other way, Zorn, Ochs parry, Zorn, Ochs parry, Zorn, Ochs parry, right? So by doing these sideways motions, you start actually building complex patterns on top of this, and some of which are actually very familiar. Like we take the swords away. When I was going this way, and I've got the right foot forward, right foot back, right foot forward, right foot back. This is a grapevine. This is a carioca, right? These are the kinds of things that are very familiar from like a fitness perspective, right? And this, I don't know that we have a name for this, but we just kind of call it the sideways crab walk, right? We kind of have to come up with a name for that. But those patterns, again, introducing them now, and they then become things that we can think about trying to fit as mechanics for interpretations, particularly interpretations which up to this point may have been kind of difficult to crack. And we're going to get to some of those specifics in later videos. But so for now, the big thing is, hey, rather than simply just turning this way, like if we need to actually take more steps and do more turning, we can actually take 2 steps using these box steps. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, right? So that's another element in terms of how can we do those rotations to really get that shoulder forward, shoulder back, shoulder forward, shoulder back as efficiently as possible. So now, when I think about Zornhau, right? Instead of always throwing this way, and this is like a huge key, this is a huge broadening of possibilities. Instead of just always doing this, notice I'm not thinking about this foot moving first necessarily. When I'm going to actually take a step with my right forward, I should actually think about this foot first. Where do I want to place it? So the fastest is to actually bring it back even with that right foot before pivoting. Pivot back, pivot forward, right? So that box step gives us actually a more efficient way to do that turn in exchange for not being able to go as far forward, right? That's the trade-off. And if we kind of extend it further, what we're doing here, this actually defines all the possible ways that we can combine our steps, assuming we're not hopping again, right? If we're taking actual steps, this covers all the ways you can step and do that switch from left shoulder forward to right shoulder forward. So the longest would be step, like a half step, then a full pivot, or leave this here and just do that pivot, or step even, pivot, that's the box step, or pivot backward, or half step, pivot backward. That covers everything. That should cover everything in terms of all the possible rotations. And again, you could add components in terms of going sideways and all that kind of stuff. But I think the important idea here is completely separate of like any other martial system influence. We're simply defining like what are all the possible ways to move. And in a minute, we'll talk about like, okay, how does that connect, for instance, to the German tradition, as well as potentially other traditions. All right, one more quick note about the pivoting thing. So this box step, notice it's 2 footfalls to switch sides. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, the box step, okay? Not the same as what I would call the replacement, sort of replacement step. So from here, like other traditions, like the Filipino Martial Arts, they'll do something they call a triangle using this kind of step, right? And it's not the same thing. It achieves very similar things. I'm switching sides, but notice 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So not the same, different number of footfalls. This has fewer footfalls, I think is more efficient. Both are interesting and both should be looked at and considered when we're talking about interpretations. But I think people are actually, when I share this with people, a lot of the time people automatically default to this sort of replacement triangle step instead of this box step. So just know the difference. So now that we've defined the box step and some of the dynamics of moving forward and backward and to the sides, what are the implications? Let's go back to the original, if we're doing Zornhau and we're leaned way back here, why is that good? Is there any reason to actually put your weight back here and come in it to begin with? So rather than taking this long transition where you literally transfer your weight from here to here to here, I now have a choice about moving this right before I actually move forward. So instead of this, we can be doing this, right? Boom, boom. Boom. Okay. So all of a sudden, if you've never thought about that before, in terms of, is there other footwork you can do to still do a Zornhau, a wrath cut, and not have to necessarily move forward that far? Here's an option, right? So this is something you can immediately take and actually see if you can work it into your fencing. The other sneaky thing, which we're going to talk about in future videos very soon, is, again, those angles. So from here, the other very cool sneaky thing as a preview is that because I withdraw my foot, if I'm going to do the box step idea, right, from here, there are techniques we're going to look at where from Zornhau, I need to actually have sort of 2 tactical choices. One is going to put me out here, and another is going to put me here. So if you use the idea, the model that you're going to take this sort of like standard walking step and you're going to leave this planted. Once you start taking this step, you commit to a side. You can't start here and easily go this way. You can't easily start this way and then go this way. However, if this is your first action, now you can, right? So from here, I can go boom, or I can go boom the other way, right? So by doing this first, it gives me that moment to both give myself a little bit of range and make a decision about which direction I want to go angle-wise. So that allows me to, for instance, do this or this. And all of a sudden, things like this become natural and possible. And just like these positions show up in the historical material, we know that positions like these also show up. And all of a sudden we have a model for how those things can actually happen organically. So I think that's it for today. Next time, we're going to talk about actual specific techniques, examples, and how we can use these to actually make those interpretations become much more practical.